Hi, my name is Tyrus Miller. I'm Dean of the UCI School of Humanities, and I'm thrilled to be joined today by four prominent School of Humanities alumni who make UCI proud. We're going to discuss their careers and the role their education at UCI played for them. First, I'm going to introduce each panelist, and we'll go in alphabetical order. So why don't you wave your hand when I get to you. First, we have Connie Griffith, who earned her B.A.s in comparative literature and East Asian cultures. She's currently a senior game designer at Sucker Punch Productions in Bellevue, Washington. So hi, Connie. Then we have Barry Lamb, who earned B.A.s in English and philosophy. He's currently chair and associate professor of philosophy at Vassar College. And he's also the creator and host of Hi-Fi Nation, that's Hi-Fi with a P-H-I, an award-winning Slate podcast that artfully blends storytelling and philosophy. We have Fabian Marquez, who earned his BA in film and media studies. He wrote the Oscar-nominated short Johnny Flinton and the Sundance hit Better Luck Tomorrow. Most recently, he served as writer and executive producer on the TV series Spies, which is currently streaming on Crackle. And when he's not screenwriting, he serves as senior creative director at a digital marketing agency. And last but not least, we have Sona Patel. She earned BAs in literary journalism and Spanish. She's currently the senior social strategy and user-generated content editor at the New York Times. She's played a vital role in engaging the public in the publication's coverage of California, healthcare, politics, and more. And I love following the New York Times California page, which I get an email every morning. I'm going to start with some questions that are tailored to each of the individuals, and then we'll go to some more general questions. So I'd like to start with you, Connie. You played an integral role in the design of the recently released and visually quite stunning Ghost of Tsushima game. Can you tell us about the role that you played and any connections between that project and the background of your education at UCI, your experience at UCI?
Yeah, sure. So I actually joined the project fairly late. So I was mostly there to help close out the production. But yeah, it was actually a really great marriage of, my former academic interests and sort of, my career in games, after school. And my role there was I am a mission designer. And really what that means is, I design little like discrete story and content experiences that players play through. I did a lot of work for like the main storyline. So, this is a game where you sort of wander around and live out your fantasies in a Kurosawa inspired, feudal Japan. And there's a main storyline that you can sort of follow, but you can also just wander the world and run into people, help them, just sort of, yeah, really, it's sort of like almost like a virtual experience of riding around and engaging with the stuff that people like me and my team put in for players to interact with.
That sounds great. And you presumably had an interest in that history that you in your studies?
Oh yeah, I actually wrote my thesis, my honors thesis on not this time period. So the game takes place during the first Mongol invasions, which is 1274. And I actually wrote my honors thesis on the Meiji era. So, it was a good 600 years later. But I did find, that plus, I studied abroad through the education abroad program with UCI and, my second BA in East Asian cultures really, I think it gave me a lot of context and understanding and to be able to sort of approach this and sort of think of ways in which we could be, respectful of the culture that we were trying to do this fictional story in, while at the same time, creating a commercial product.
It sounds like a great way for people to really explore different cultures and different historical mindsets and periods and ambiances.
Yeah. Oh no. There was a crazy amount of detail that they went like. There were some things even where they went and they part of the creative direction team, they actually went to the island of Tsushima and scanned foliage from the island. And that actually is some of the visual effects, like the leaves that are falling are actual leaves that were scanned from the island of Tsushima. So it's pretty incredible the level of detail that they went to.
That sounds amazing. So thank you, Connie. Barry, in addition to earning your PhD and becoming a professor at Vassar College, you also founded the Hi-Fi Nation podcast, which is something that I've listened to and love. It's really an amazing production. Can you tell us about that experience? Why a podcast? Why philosophy? Why you wanted to bring philosophy to a kind of bigger audience through podcasting? What's it like to look back on when you first launched the project?
It was really one of these things where after it's kind of the first stage of your career, so I actually pursued my academic interest all the way through and got to a professorship and then tenure, but that's sort of like the first milestone of the academic life. And I was missing the creative side, right? In the academic life, there isn't a lot of opportunity to do more creative work that is an extension of what it is you're already an expert at. And so that's really the motivation for the pursuit of the podcast. Also because the I was a KUCI alum too. So the campus radio station loomed very large in my college life. And I kind of abandoned all of that afterward, only to, in some ways, come back to it. I wasn't just a member of the on-air staff. I was general manager. I was the program director there. I trained a whole generation of KUCI DJs. And so it was very organic to think that audio was going to be a kind of creative medium by which I was going to do something creative that was also academic. And then the other thing that happened was this was about the time where there was an explosion of interest, as well as money, let's put it that way, in academic crossover creative things of this kind. So Freakonomics Radio was going into its, halfway through its lifespan at 5-6 years. It's more than a decade now. NPR has since put out a lot of things. They have a show called Throughline now, which is history, reported history, and academic history. 1619 Project at the New York Times is something that's in the news quite a bit, and they had an audio component as well. So all of this was in the air, and sort of everybody was coming up, but nobody was doing it for philosophy. And that's my area, and that's an area which I could contribute, I think, meaningfully. So that's how it all came together.
So you're giving us a good reminder that at a university, not all the education takes place in the classroom or in front of books, but there are lots of other kinds of experiential opportunities, like working at the KUCI radio station, that you've been able to really kind of put together with your academic background and utilize in creative ways.
Absolutely. A campus newspaper, if people are working on there, which I'm sure a lot of humanities majors are, all of those things are so important.
Can I just ask you also, I know that, you started probably somewhat humbly, but you've really built Hi-Fi Nation into a kind of a formidable nation. Can you say a little bit about kind of the step up that you've taken with that?
The way that media happens nowadays is so much a matter of both luck and also just relentless perseverance to try to get people to pay attention to you. So let me give you an example. So that first season that I was making it, I was down in North Carolina on fellowship making that first season. I actually sat there tweeting at people. I have insomnia, so it's like 3 or 5 in the morning, and I might just like tweet at people to listen to the show. Just like one-on-one, just, hey, you're a fan of this show, you can listen to my show. I think I sent something like 300 this one night, and Twitter says, okay, that's enough. Like, we think you're a bot, right? So that's how it happened in the beginning. And then, so what happens after that is if some journalists or some culture critics who have their own audience pick it up, listen to it, and then review it well, then you kind of build an audience from there. I would still like to be bigger, but that's sort of how you have to make it happen if you're just an individual person. If you work for an organization that has a team behind it, then you have a competitive advantage.
Well, I won't go too far with someone furiously late night tweeting. We could get into tricky territory there.
Yeah.
But let's go on to Fabian. Fabian, when you first came to UCI, you wanted to be the next Spielberg. What changed, or maybe you still want to be the next Spielberg? But what changed? How did your education at UCI set you on the path that you're now on?
Well, I mean, it was a pretty insular upbringing, and I had a very narrow view of cinema. I was in love with cinema, but I had a very narrow view of what cinema was. And so entering the Film and Media Studies program just blew open a whole world for me. I mean, when you're young and you're in the very beginning of your career, or just starting to figure out what you want to do, you're a sponge, and you pattern yourself after the biggest and the best, the most obvious. It's a little bit like, playing basketball and saying, I'm going to be the next LeBron James. But through the Film and Media Studies program, I was exposed to this huge spectrum of storytellers from different eras and different regions. And I just fell in love with so many different types of filmmakers, and that started to be a mirror through which I could see myself reflected, and I started to kind of pattern myself after other types of storytellers. The Film and Media Studies program is very focused on analysis, on reading and writing about movies, as much as it is about watching films. And so that opened up also a kind of a film language that I also did not possess prior to that. And so after leaving UCI and sort of indirectly because of UCI, I ended up working for Steven Spielberg for a while. I was at DreamWorks, and his office was just upstairs from me. And I was, of course, a huge fanboy of his, but still, I think what UCI enabled me to do was have a conversation with Steven about cinema, because he could definitely teach a class at UCI. And
that would be great if you could arrange that.
Yeah, well, let me see what I could do. I'm sure his schedule's pretty open right now. But yeah, I felt like I could go from being a fanboy, sort of being in awe of my idol, to actually being able to speak with him as a peer because of the education I got at UCI.
That's a really great observation, and I think our film program really does give you, the potential, if you're wanting to pursue it, almost a kind of encyclopedic knowledge of the tradition in film, which is now over 100 years of cinema. And you're pointing to something that I think that people don't always realize, which is that the great filmmakers, and this is true of Truffaut and Godard, but also, Scorsese and Spielberg and Coppola, they're great encyclopedic watchers of films, and, taking in that knowledge of film. And I hope that we're able to give our students that opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you do. I mean, people always ask me about film school and the value of film school. And I think that I put into two categories. A lot of people put a premium on the production-focused schools that teach you the formal aspects of filmmaking and the craft of filmmaking. But what I discovered after I left UCI is that you can learn that 6 months of working on set, work your way up as a PA. You'll learn everything you need to know about C-stands and f-stops and all of the formal aspects of filmmaking. But you'd have to be like a Tarantino-like protege, where you just live in a video store and consume, 5 movies a day. And that's a lot of proactivity on the part of that person to get what you get at UCI and to be able to, engage other film lovers, because that's the language of filmmaking, really, is talking about precedent and what others have done and how you aspire to elevate and stand on the shoulders of the giants that preceded you. You can't get that, I think, in a school that's more strictly focused on production. So anyway, I digress. Sorry.
Well, thank you, Fabian. Sona, when you graduated from UCI, social media jobs were really just beginning to be standardized across industries. How did you end up really, kind of getting into this area, leading social media strategy at one of the most prized publications in the world? And I'd also, if I can just pile on another little bit of a question here, social media is evolving very, very fast, and I just very rapidly, and I just wonder if you also have any observations about kind of differences when you started and where you see us going now with social media.
Yeah, those are great questions. When I graduated from UCI in 2006, social media was just becoming a thing in newsrooms. More and more people outside of the campus setting, outside of colleges, were starting to adopt it. And I actually started my career out of UCI as a beat reporter and not using social media because social media had not yet come into the news and journalism scene. But I started early on in my beat reporting career, like using social media both personally and professionally. So I was experimenting with it on my own. I was like live tweeting events, or I was, tweeting or posting about updates from stories when I was out in the field. And I was one of the very few people in my newsroom who was doing that. And my editor even sort of brushed it off and was like, I don't think we should waste too much time doing this. We really need to feed the print newspaper. And, fast forward a few years after that, I became so into social media because I was using it on my own so much and in my reporting that I moved up from the Tribune in San Luis Obispo to the Seattle Times, then to the New York Times. And when I started at the New York Times, the organization was just hiring editors to focus solely on social media. And because I had that experience using it in my own reporting and in my previous 2 jobs, I made myself kind of a good candidate for that position at the Times. And as far as the technology adapting and how it has changed over time, I mean, if I look back at 2006, and even before that, when I started at UCI, right, Facebook was just available to college campuses. And now, fast forward, it's like Facebook is almost, we look at other platforms now for engaging even younger readers, right? TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, and there are so many more platforms that are available now. And it's also interesting to see how much social media plays a role in you being able to be your own content creator. If we could talk so much about influencers and how people have made careers out of that, and how much of a role social media plays in shaping the news cycle and shaping the conversation around news, for better or for worse. And so I've just seen it go through its many iterations, but it's just really amazing to see how much of a part it plays in how the news is shaped. And now, of course, our biggest kind of threats are misinformation and disinformation, and a lot of that is seeded in social media. So it's interesting to kind of see how that has changed over time.
Well, we're seeing social media as, kind of an important tool in the toolbox, maybe a really primary tool in the toolbox for, a free press and an informative press. And at the same time, there's a way in which I'm seeing, even in print media, I'm seeing more and more coverage of social media as a means of actually making the news. And I mean, actually, like, the event that gets covered, whether it's Facebook, shutting down QAnon, or Twitter, putting a tag on one of President Trump's tweets, or other instances where the social media report, let's say, or transmission has become the news item that gets reported.
Yeah, absolutely. And look how much has changed since even the last election, and how much of that coverage right now is focused on big tech and what these social media companies, these big tech companies, are doing to try to, not just, I wouldn't say rein in the information, but take control of it, because we see how powerful it is and how much of an influence it is.
Well, we're really glad to have you working on keeping those very powerful means public and contributing to our public democratic discourse.
Thank you.
Well, I want to move on now to a kind of a more general question that really all of you can answer. And I would like to, you represent different industry sectors, different kinds of professional activities. And I'd like to ask you, if you were giving advice to students who are coming into UCI and thinking about wanting to work in your particular area broadly, not necessarily your particular position in it, but your sector, would you have advice for them about the way in which they can use their university time most effectively to, not prepare for a specific work, because it's probably going to be very different by the time that they get out, but to think about the sector and to think about what they could do to best prepare? And maybe I'll stay with you, Sona.
Yeah, sure. I would love to double down on what Barry said. He was working at KUCI, and he gave a shout out to the school paper, The New U. I was editor of The New U, and I thought that was one of the most invaluable experiences I had at UCI. So my biggest piece of advice would be, with the career fields changing and technology changing so rapidly, the more you can spend your university time experimenting and trying different things outside of just your core classwork is really important. I joined The New U as a staff writer with very little interest in journalism my sophomore year, but I wanted to take up an extracurricular activity that I thought would complement the work I was doing in humanities and literary journalism. And it was just so eye-opening and opened so many doors for me that I just developed an interest in journalism, learning more about it, learning more about the First Amendment, and what it meant for our campus community, for our society. And so I would say just the more you can really explore and take advantage of all the resources that UCI has to offer, the better, because once you kind of get into your career field, and I'm sure my colleagues here could understand this, that you are working, and it's very difficult sometimes to pull away and find time to explore other areas of interest and other opportunities.
I'm just also curious, if you kind of retain contact with anyone that you work with in that. I mean, as I get older, obviously it sort of winnows down, but I still have personal but also professional connections with people that are part of my undergraduate and graduate study.
I keep in touch the most with my new university colleagues. Like one of them actually teaches with me. I part-time teach at Cal State Long Beach, and he is also a professor there. And so we talk to each other pretty often. He was a news editor when I was editor-in-chief, and I also remain pretty closely in touch with others, particularly ones who have pursued journalism. And we just kind of get together every so often to talk about our time at UCI and how our field is evolving. But I so strongly believe, I mean, you bring up an excellent point, is that keeping those connections sort of fresh, and like keeping in touch with people who are in your classes and in the extracurricular fields that you join can only help you going forward. And it's just a great way to stay in touch with the UCI family.
Great. How about you, Fabian? The the career advice for someone wanting to go into your sector, and also, if I would be interested if you retain contacts from your UCI years.
Yeah, the contacts are huge. I benefited greatly from the networking aspect of it. One of my close collaborators is somebody that I met in film class at UCI. We're out with a screenplay right now, and several others have gone on to have careers in the entertainment industry, and we're friends, of course. But as they say in Hollywood, it's all about who you know, and so that's a big component. Also at UC Irvine, I mean, first of all, the education is invaluable, so that would be the bedrock answer. Is the education did a lot for me for my career, but in addition, similarly to both Barry and Sona, I participated in a number of extracurricular things that were available to me at UCI that also were instrumental. For example, we had something called the UCI Film Society, where I got to be a programmer for monthly screenings. We were given a budget and we would kind of curate that season's offerings of films, and we would rent them ourselves. We would source the 16mm prints in that case, and we would sell tickets and advertise, and it was fantastic. And then later, when I would travel with my own films to film festivals, and I would engage with curators and programmers, we had this shared experience, and it gave me an appreciation of what they do and allowed me to understand how to engage with them better. So yeah, and of course there's great internship experiences, and I was able to, while an undergrad, I was able to network with alums from UCI, and I was a PA on an independent film before I graduated. And then to this day, I still keep in touch with a lot of my profs. We're in touch, we still communicate, and that's just so gratifying. I feel such a debt of gratitude to several of my professors, and so to be able to continue that relationship post-graduation is fantastic.
That's really great. And your evocation of a 16mm projector, for those of our audience who don't know what that is.
That sounds like I went to school in the Nixon era or something. Yeah.
Hey, Ty, can I ask Fabian something?
Yes, please.
Fabian, I have this memory. Was there an early screening of Better Luck Tomorrow at UCI?
Yes.
Way back when? Okay, I was at that. This is like a 20-year-old memory. I just remember watching this thing well before, it was about a while before it was out, right? A few months maybe? Or
Yeah, we went to Sundance in 2002, and then we toured. We went to the Asian American film festivals and several others. And yeah, I think it was in Crystal Cove Auditorium.
Yeah, I remember this. I remember this.
That was
senior year, I think.
Yeah.
Discovering new connections.
Oh, that's so fantastic. So I was there. So we probably brushed shoulders.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Barry, same question. Thinking about work in your sector, which is academia, and also in a niche in media.
I think that everything Sona and Fabian said, networking, I would have said all of that instead of what I'm going to say now. But given that they've covered it, I think that what I want to add to it is, if you're a humanities major, you have a certain kind of curiosity. You have a curiosity about the humanities. You have a curiosity about human experiences, human cultures, histories, things like that. And I would say what I would add is that if you are a specialist, try to be a generalist. If you're a generalist, try to specialize in something. So if you are moving, if you are somebody who wrote a thesis about the Meiji Restoration, that's wonderful. You're a specialist. And then, but coming out, expand your curiosity, right? And if you are somebody who's curious about a lot of different things, specialize in one thing for a little while, either as a hobby or as a little independent project. And one thing that I've discovered is that, so what academia does is it forces you to specialize. And I think what media, on the other hand, does is forces you to generalize. You can't just, if you were in media just from academia, you would sound really boring because you're going right into the nitty-bitty details of some debate that only 3 academics care about, right? But in media, you don't want that. You want to make connections across history, across different cultures. You want to connect issues. And so I think that for people who are in the humanities, you already have an inclination to do that. And I would hate that whatever, wherever you end up working for, if it ends up being specializing, that you don't also have something else happening so you can generalize. Because, careers change, careers develop, careers expand for everybody. Even if you are, you might start off as thinking you're only going to be a screenwriter, but then you end up doing different things in production, right? You might think that you're only interested in this period of Japanese history, but you end up designing a game about a very different period. And so, so that's what I would say. My suggestion would be take on projects that specialize your curiosity if you're a generalist, but that or also expand your curiosity if you're a specialist.
That's great advice. And I've heard people use the metaphor of a kind of T-shape where you have a deep knowledge in some area, maybe your thesis topic or your research or your particular interest, but also the ability to kind of talk across that top bar where you can move horizontally from area to area and be able to move around. And some of the opportunities that we have in the humanities, including minors, double majors, the core course, which is very comprehensive in terms of the different areas that you get some knowledge of, I think is speaking to the kind of advice that you're giving, Barry. Mm-hmm. Well, let's go to Connie, and same question. I'd also be interested if you remain in contact with people, or if those have those relationships have remained important to you.
I think there's 1 or 2 professors that I have talked with a little bit over the years. I was actually working full time the whole time I was at UCI, so I am sad because that really cut into my time to be able to socialize or be involved in extracurricular activities. Kind of hard to do it when you're carrying 20 units and working 40 hours a week. But strangely enough, my time in Japan, which was the 1 year I was not working while I was in school, I actually now work at Sony still with one of the folks that I met on exchange. And I had to go up to the Sony headquarters over in San Mateo recently, and we got to catch up, and we've kept in touch over the years. So that's probably my sole academic contact over the years. Feel bad saying this, but I don't know that you need to go and get a 4-year education to go into the games industry. And that being said, I really enjoyed my time at UCI. I wish that I could have afforded to not work and take more full advantage. But I think I got a lot out of my time there. And I would say for people, if you want to go into games, right now there's just so many things that you can do. I believe UCI also, offers minors and things like that. And certainly, computer science engineering, if being a programmer is something that you're interested in and wanting to do it in games, UCI has great programs for that. I think for me, it's more like a larger thing where I have this firm belief that everybody should have a good grounding in the humanities, and everybody should have an understanding of all these sort of like literary and cultural traditions and understandings of how we engage with the world and how we critically think about things. And so, maybe it's not so much like the practical, like these things map to, this particular thing in your career, but I definitely find, at least for me, it allows me to engage a lot more thoughtfully instead of, Ghost of Tsushima is, you go around and, it's a combat game, but what are some ways in which we can be thoughtful in how we apply our verbs to what the story is doing, or, themes? How can we think about experiences more? And I think having that, being steeped in that, understanding, engaging with history, engaging with philosophy, and applying it to your work, right? I think that does nothing but make, our medium better and push video games forward as an art form. And it's tough because on one hand, just like film, there are times when it's just entertainment, right? Like, it doesn't necessarily have to say anything, but I think that art that tries to do both, to try and be, thoughtful about what it's trying to say and also provide an compelling experience, like those are skills. Those are things that I acquired through my education at UCI. That being said, again, my advice is so many people, like, I've been in the games industry since I was 19, and I've met so many people, and for design especially, we come from all sorts of backgrounds. I've worked with people who got degrees in history. I have worked with people who I like to call feral game designers, who have no formal education in games, myself included. I thought I was going to be an academic. I was applying to PhD programs when I decided to, pursue a career in games. And what I find is it's really important as a good game designer to look at things outside of just the practical. How do I learn how to use 3D modeling tools? How do I use, an editor like Unreal or Unity, which are popular free editors that honestly any student right now can just download for free and play around in. But, getting an education at a great place like UCI, and especially through the humanities program, I think that those will give you the critical thinking skills and the ability to just learn and apply what you've seen and what you enjoy, to be able to articulate and share those ideas. And that is really, I think, the key thing that translates from, what I learned at UCI to, making video games for a living.
Well, as you say, you don't necessarily have to have an academic background to be able to design good games. I will mention that in the film and media studies, the media component is really becoming stronger. I mean, we have a very strong, cinema and film studies aspect, but there's a lot of interest in games and game design. We have at least 3 faculty now really working in that area. So you don't necessarily have to be a critical theorist of games to make games, but I think it is an opportunity to, reflect on the practice and reflect on the history and get a sense of maybe where the game industry is and should be going.
Yeah. And I think, less so in AAA, which is the space that I work in. But I think, for example, indie games is a space where they're just doing some just really fantastic stuff. I specialize in storytelling in terms of game design, writing and storytelling. And the new and fascinating ways that we're finding to share stories that aren't, perfectly captured by, cutscenes, that are not perfectly captured by, watching a fancy movie embedded in between, gameplay pits where you're, as we call it, on the sticks, right? You're moving your character around. And I've just been really loving that. And I find a lot of people are finding ways to say things that they, may not necessarily be able to say, in particular mediums. And I'm sure, my fellow panelists here, they can definitely, speak to the experience of, we all have stories, we all have thoughts and ideas that we want to share. And it's really great to be able to have a variety of ways in which you can, explore them, because you can, highlight or, emphasize certain things that you can't, depending on, what medium you use.
Oh, I'm really struck by all 4 of you being in your different areas and different media, gifted storytellers. And it's not the only thing that the humanities do, but I think that we really see that emphasis on narrative and story as, you know, kind of one of the pillars of the humanities, whether you're talking about factual narratives in history or in, you know, kind of contemporary culture, or imaginative narratives in literature and film, and also our literary journalism program, which really is about, you know, innovative ways, I think, of telling stories about the real life situations and events that are in the news and are worthy of reflective consideration and presentation to readers. So I really appreciate all of your work in this area, and I think it is something that really resonates with what we have to offer in the humanities at UCI. So I want to really thank all of you for taking the time to be here today. We're really proud of all of you, that you have been so accomplished in your, you know, in your pursuits and in your careers. We're grateful for your continued connection with your alma mater. And for the students who are watching this video, I hope that this gives you some insights into what you can do with the humanities major. Perhaps ideas that you find unexpected, or you find, you know, you hadn't thought of before. So we want to really thank everybody for tuning in. And thank you again to all four of you.